Now, the spring snow, which hit large parts of the UK 3 weeks ago, had a devastating effect on livestock. But now there's been a little bit of good news, at least, for one farm in Northern Ireland. 2 sheep, each worth more than £1,000, have been found alive along a fence where they were covered in 6 feet of snow.
They were lost and now they've been found. The sheep missing for more than 3 weeks in the snow. A man walking his dog spotted them and told the farmer Sam Wallace the good news about the lost sheep. He couldn't believe it, and neither could his son Graham. He had taken pictures of the field where the rams were last seen 23 days previously. So you're sitting at the dinner table, the phone rings, it's your neighbour to say he's found your lost sheep. Did you believe it, or were you a doubting Thomas?
You'll have to see it to believe it. Gives you a bit of hope when something lives, when you've been through 2 or 3 weeks of what farmers have been through in the area.
For most of the time, the sheep had been completely covered in snow. Only in recent days did it start to thaw. Although 2 rams were found here alive, another was dead. So how do you think the sheep survived?
Well, probably the dike here created air pockets, and that helped them to survive. But at the end of the day, it was a miracle.
The survival skills of the sheep have earned them the nickname the Rambo Rams, and they certainly now have a spring in their step. Mark Simpson, BBC News, North Antrim.
Coming up at 6 o'clock on Breakfast, Charlie and Louise will be here with all the day's news, the business and the sport. Plus Breakfast, Tim Muffet. He'll be speaking to Keith Luxon, who ran the marathon in Boston and now says he's determined to compete in London as well. I'm Martine Dennis with the top stories this hour here at BBC World News. There's been a massive explosion at a fertiliser plant in the small town of West, that's just north of Waco in Texas. George Smith from West Emergency Services has been working to help those trapped and injured in the blast. He said many people had been either killed or injured.
Actually, I got trapped in the explosion with the window and the ceiling fell in on me. We got the nursing home evacuated as best we could. There are probably at least 100 injured taken to the hospitals we know of. I'm afraid there are going to be many, many fatalities. Right now the fire is still going on and it's toxic chemicals, so we really can't get in. We're waiting for Texas Task Force 1, which is a search and rescue team.
And reports from the USA, investigators have identified a suspect in the Boston Marathon bombings from video footage. However, Boston police denied reports that an arrest had been made. 3 people died in the twin blasts on Monday. Dozens more people are still in hospital. And the FBI, they've named a suspect that they've arrested in connection with the write-in letters that were sent to President Obama as well as to a US Senator. His name, Paul Kevin Curtis from Mississippi. The letters were intercepted before reaching the White House or the Senate. And away from the US, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the BBC that the flow of arms into Syria could alter the balance of power in the Middle East. He also warned Israel has the right to prevent weapons from falling into the wrong hands. Right, it's time for us to have a look at the stories that are making headlines around the world this morning. This is where I need a bit of extra help. And The Independent follows suit with many of the world's papers by looking at the funeral of former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
El País says the Spanish government acknowledged Venezuelan election results after previously demanding a recount.
Now, Greece's poor are really struggling to survive, with many children going hungry to school. The International Herald Tribune says savings have been used up and the economy is now in free fall.
Today's Daily Telegraph's business section looks at how Apple shares dropped below $400 after one of its suppliers posted disappointing results.
Well, we have Rolake Akinkugbe here with us. She's the head of energy research at EcoBank. Good morning, Rolake. Nice to see you. Now, yesterday, I mean, it was a huge national event, and to reflect that fact, so many of the British papers today have got what they're calling souvenir editions, but we're particularly looking at The Independent with a very graphic and very, well, it's a lovely picture, isn't it? but tells a story.
It is, and you call it a huge national event. I would say that's probably an understatement. I mean, many people are saying it was essentially a state funeral in all but name. And it comes with all that pomp and circumstances that you would, and certainly even international observers would associate with sort of grand British events. And sort of reminds me of the royal wedding. And one of the interesting things is not since 1965, when Winston Churchill was buried, has the Queen attended a funeral of a former Prime Minister. So this is quite significant, and there were some very interesting elements as well.
But did you appreciate the pomp and the circumstance, the way in which is quintessentially British? Would you have said so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's quintessentially British, and then, you know, what, of course, St. Paul's Cathedral, what else could be more quintessentially British? I think what was interesting, the thing about it was also the people who attended. 170 countries were represented, and however much you think about Thatcher's policies, the fact is actually in her death, she actually unified quite a wide spectrum of people around the world. Yeah.
Now let's have a look at some other papers and what they're covering today. A major broadsheet in Spain, El País, widely read. Spain draws line under vote, recount spat with Venezuela. Talking about the fact that, you know, Madrid was sort of saying earlier this week, we want to see a recount. Do you think, you know, Venezuela's bothered or listening?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, former colony Spain. The interesting thing here is that Venezuela had recalled the Spanish ambassador, actually. And the problem here is that Spain has actually jumped ahead of the EU in essentially endorsing Maduro's election. The problem is very tight race between Maduro and the opposition. There were some protests, but I suspect this will probably just fetter out after a couple of weeks.
Now, I know you know Nigeria exceedingly well. Do you think it's a good idea for a former colonial power to be intervening in the first place?
Well, I think one of the considerations here is do you prioritise stability over potential protests and uncertainty going forward. And certainly Venezuela is an important oil producer, so that's a factor.
International Herald Tribune, a really poignant story about how tough things are in Greece for people, and it focuses on children going to school hungry. It talks about one little boy who's just racked with pain. He's so hungry at school, and when the family were quizzed about it, they just had to admit they'd run out of savings. They were trying to survive. They were living on pasta and tomato ketchup.
I mean, this is a really sad story beyond the headlines about the Eurozone crisis. This is how it actually affects people right at the bottom of the ladder. Unemployment levels in Greece are now at 29%, the highest in the entire EU zone. And this is quite significant. So we were talking about real poverty. I mean, we'd seen stories in the past about people queuing for handouts and food. And this is really a reflection of what is going on a much more larger scale, I think, than we actually know about. And it's really sad that it's affecting children and the very vulnerable.
How do you think the balance in terms of the debate is going with regard to austerity and cutting of deficits versus growth and stimulating
Well, it's
economy?
a difficult question, a different dilemma for policymakers in any country. You have to strike a real balance, and you think about what you have to give up in order to save for long-term sustainable growth. Unfortunately, there needs to be cushioning effects that will make it easier for the economy to bear the brunt of some of these measures, and we're actually starting to see it in a very real way. And the question is, what is the government doing to support those right at the bottom of the ladder?
Okay, difficult one. Now, Apple, its shares were at a peak in September 2011, cost over $700 to get an Apple share then. Yesterday, they dipped below $400 for the first time in quite some time, but they closed a little bit higher than $400.
I mean, this is...
Give us, you know, I mean, we all watch these things like a hawk, those of us who are in business and we're sort of, you know, market geeks.
Yeah,
give us your take on it.
This is really a case of whetting people's appetite. As a technology company, you have to keep innovating. If you're not innovating, your consumers get worried. There's also a big issue of demand in China, and we obviously know the East are big consumers of technology and especially Apple products. And as a consumer, if you expected a new model of a phone to come out, you'd hold off spending now and just wait till the future.
It's interesting though, because one of the reasons why the shares went down is because one of Apple's suppliers was talking about the fact that it's not got as many orders coming in, it's got a bit of an inventory issue going on, and we've got a few suppliers saying the same thing.
And that is a really interesting thing, because it shows how sensitive the markets are right now, and I think it also reflects a broader global economic climate around demand.
And this is the case. I mean, you're also one of your main stories today is Nokia, isn't it? I mean, this seems to have been the problem that's really blighted the fortunes of Nokia as another company, because they haven't kept up with their research and development, they haven't kept up with the technology.
Absolutely, and it might be an opportunity for others to come in and innovate in the short term whilst Apple is going through this very challenging time financially.
But of course the only way for Apple is down. When you're the most valuable company in the world, there's only one direction to go in, isn't there? Really quickly, we didn't highlight it specifically, but apparently taxi drivers are being urged to get training in China. South China Morning Post. What are they up to over there? Should we be concerned if we get in a taxi in Beijing?
I mean, this is really interesting, because I know some parts of the world where taxi drivers are actually given mental tests when they violate traffic offences. I wouldn't mention the country, but essentially this is compulsory training courses. From a safety point of view, this is quite significant, and also because essentially in terms of the numbers of cars on the road in urban areas, heavily populated areas, I think it's probably about time this happens. The taxi unions have actually rejected the idea, saying it would hinder drivers' work. And I think it reflects the system, and there needs to be a system of ensuring that people who are on the roads are actually sound in mind, certainly to be driving on the roads.
It might help, mightn't it? Rolake Akingugbe, thank you very much indeed for taking us through the papers this morning. Now, very quickly, let's show you some new footage now. New footage has come in of that massive explosion that we've been telling you about this morning that's taken place in Texas. Now, it happened in a town, a very small town called West. Now, this is footage that was apparently taken by passers-by. This is a family in their car, and they're just passing by. And as you can see, actually, in the wing mirror, you can see the reflection of somebody with either a video cam or a rather large mobile phone. But that is the fire. And there you see the moment of the explosion. Now, there's talk of hundreds of people already having been taken to hospital with serious injuries. No idea as to the number of fatalities, but it looks terribly grim in terms of the number of people who've been seriously injured so far. We're also hearing that, for instance, a nursing home was centred very close by to this plant, this fertiliser plant, and we're also hearing that there are schools dotted around the area as well. We've been speaking to the emergency services in the town of West, and they've been saying that they're run off their feet. They really need extra equipment, heavy lifting equipment in particular, and they're talking about rescuing people who've been caught up in buildings that have kind of semi-fallen down but haven't been completely demolished. We'll keep you right up to date here at BBC World News.
Stay with us. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.